The Future Sport Podcast is brought to you by 3Advance, developers of sports tech apps that are AI-powered and UX-focused. So if you're looking to create some apps for your startup or your sports biz calls for some artificial or business intelligence, you should check out 3Advance. They're incredible. Go to 3advance.com. That's the number 3advance.com.
Empire.
Let's think about those fun, non-social distancing times.
What that did was that created a lot of small businesses starting up, playing around with different fabrics and different fillings inside the cornhole bag. So we basically set the specs, we approved bags similar to, let's say, how a bowling ball would be approved.
That's Stacey Moore. He's the commissioner of the American Cornhole League on innovation. Yes, innovation in one of the most simple yet popular games. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. We are not trying to diminish what is happening in the world right now. In fact, we hope to use this forum over the next few weeks or months to shed some light on innovation in the health sector as we all cope and deal with the spread of the coronavirus. This is not a strictly stick-to-sports medium, but with distraction in mind as we all hunker down somewhere, I thought it would be proper to try to get your mind on a happier time, like when my family sets up our cornhole boards on the beach. And Stacey Moore will surprise you with how innovative the sport of cornhole has and will become. Plus, the NFL is moving forward with their league year, albeit remotely. So let's start with Mike Band, analyst of Next Gen Stats with the league, as the future is now with them being our sole focus in sports coverage. So the NFL Combine is behind us, and the NFL Draft, which is one of the major events of the sporting calendar, is on its way. So let's check in on the future of finding the next big stars of the NFL with Mike Band, who wrote a very interesting piece saying Next Gen Stats draft model can predict a prospect's pro success. He's a Next Gen Stats analyst with the NFL. Hey, Mike, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, Bram.
Why don't we talk about just generally what you're doing there for the NFL?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm part of the Next Gen Stats data science team. Our primary goal is to really better understand and really disseminate player tracking data at the NFL level. So we've been collecting tracking data for the last 4 years. And we use that data for media purposes, and then the clubs also use that data to really improve their decision-making across all aspects. This draft model is our first exploration into non-tracking data analytics. And what this model truly tries to represent is, can we use the data collected at the combine, data collected at the college level as far as production, and can we predict NFL success?
Outside of, obviously, injury, which is the one thing that you cannot account for here, right?
Absolutely. And that is something that could be predicted in terms of if you were to have extensive medical reports and, tracking data at the college level, that could be then transferred into the football level. But as far as injury detection, that's still very early on in its predictability.
All right, so where you are in this process at this point, do you know what level of success you've had in using these models to predict some of the most recent players that have entered the league?
Sure. So when we used the model, we took the 2019 class and put it through the model and analyzed the results. And it was interesting. What we found was, this is probably our best stat to encompass this, of the 13 players that scored a 92 or higher in our final draft score model, all 13 started at least 4 games during their rookie season this past NFL season. So it does have a level of predictability. At the same time, it is more of a directional indication. So if you have a high score, that's good enough. if you have a low score, it's more of a risk. So it really is identifying players with blue traits and identifying players who have potential risky metrics that would lead to less likely chance of success.
I'm far from the naysayer here. I'm behind all this stuff, but just for context and out of curiosity, and I'm putting you on the spot with the players that you modeled that are actually playing, how many of them were early round picks? Because as you know, there is pressure on teams to play those guys early as well.
Certainly, absolutely. So there were a bunch of players that made the cut of that 92 or higher that were later round picks. So, for example, Juan Thornhill, the chief safety, who made a big impact. Montez Sweat, who went a little bit later in the first round. Deebo Samuel in the second round for the 49ers. He was on this list. Marquise Brown, the receiver for the Ravens. He had a big year as far as being a productive deep threat for Lamar Jackson and company. Jamel Dean, the cornerback from Auburn, who made a big impact with the Buccaneers this season. So it's not just the top-level guys that made this impact. And while our model does identify that several of those top guys do possess those elite traits, it really does help you identify not just the gems, but some of those late-round studs that you can potentially find with analytical research and analytical help.
All right, I know I'm going to be heading down the proprietary part of this, but I am curious, what of the traits of these players stick out to you as the benchmarks for that person is likely to have a very successful career?
Yeah, I would actually like to describe what the model tries to do, because you hit it right on the head, the benchmarks, the thresholds. So if this were to be, not to get too technical, but if this were to be a linear model, that would indicate that for every increase in speed, you would have an increase in output. But what we know from just the theory of football and just the theory of understanding this combine data, the relationship between these metrics and the output is nonlinear. We know that being fast is good, but you might have to be just fast enough. You might have to be just big enough. And once you meet those thresholds, there is no marginal improvement or gain by being faster or being bigger than those necessary thresholds. So if we were to talk about running backs, we look at the key traits from the position. 3-cone drill is a very important drill. The main key threshold is under 717 in the 3-cone drill. So if you make that threshold, you are likely to, or at least that metric indicates that that is not necessarily a risky proposition. On the other end, if you run faster than a 6.8 flat, that's another indicator of future success. Similarly, when we look at 40 time, if you have a running back that runs a 4.5 versus a 4.6, there really isn't that big marginal difference. It's when a running back runs slower than 4.71, you sort of understand this risk. So the idea is really to identify these thresholds, to really home in on players that meet the thresholds versus do not meet thresholds, and then allow the scouting process to sort them out as far as breaking ties on the draft board. So really this is just it's a support, not replace, of the traditional scouting process.
So you're doing this with the NFL as a whole. I would imagine the teams want this information. So how do you kind of balance that part of it?
The teams have a unique data set in that their scouts are going out and working essentially as private investigators. They're collecting an exorbitant amount of information beyond just what we see in the media. So at the Combine, they test. They have incredible amounts of tests that we don't see the results of: flexibility, heart rate, fat-free max, all these different metrics that the teams have that we don't necessarily have to use as inputs. So when you talk about the ability for a team to create a model and to identify these thresholds, they're going to have a bigger breadth of data. From our standpoint, we just want to measure against the league average. What does it take to be a starter in this league? What does it take to be a Pro Bowler in this league? But when you look at a team, they're going to want to model around what fits their system, what fits their defense, what fits their offensive line. So it's going to be a little bit of a unique problem for a team that would differ necessarily from our model. the cool part about it all is that teams will start to get into this habit of trying to collect all this information, put it into a model, and identify those key traits and those key thresholds. It's just they're the only ones with the breadth of data that could probably predict down to, or at least using all of the key factors beyond just athleticism, production, and size. They've got psychological data, they've got measurements, they've got biographical. So it's really the teams that can find a way to replicate this type of modeling will naturally have an advantage come draft day.
So the purpose of this data for you is to disseminate it how and for who? The fan?
The fan, yes. That is the early initiative. So really, the combine can be a little bit of an overwhelming process. We see the 40 times. We hear Daniel Jeremiah and Rich Eisen talk about these players, and can we encapsulate that combine performance into a single score? That's the best use case of what we can do. Can you describe this player? How athletic is a player based off of all of their traits? So the idea is, can we represent the collection of traits into a single score from 50 to 99? And the idea is, can we simply say that this guy is an elite athlete, this guy is a below average athlete, this guy is had elite production at the college level, and really putting all those things together, you can tell a pretty fun story for fans and for the media of the results of this model.
I mean, listen, I'm a fan of the NFL draft. I've been watching it forever. It's like a national holiday to me to watch the NFL draft. But part of the fun part is when whoever the analyst is says someone made a reach, and you guys are actually now putting data behind it to suggest there are some teams that might be making big mistakes too. So there is the other side of that as well.
No doubt. And we certainly like to take more of a positive stance in our analysis. But there definitely is that layer of, can you identify the teams that are making sound analytical decisions? Whether or not our model encapsulates the stuff, the intangibles that aren't necessarily quantifiable from the data that we have, that's really what separates the usability from our model to necessarily for an NFL team on draft day.
I've talked to a lot of people about analytics across a number of different sports, and I will ask you this too, because you do have a background of having worked in a scouting department in the NFL. Do you think all of this information at some point eliminates the need for human scouts?
I would never say that. That's one of the early things that I would ever say to a traditional football coach, scout, front office executive is that we're trying to support the evaluation process, not replace it. It's the idea of almost like the game of Minesweeper. You want to avoid landmines by making sound decisions and improving the decision-making process. You want to use numbers to guide you. But in the end, it's still going to come down to the information collected by scouts, the film grades, the film analysis, all of those traits, all of the things that you can't necessarily quantify or we can't necessarily quantify yet. That's going to separate a model like this from what scouts do on a daily basis.
The other thing that came out that I thought was really interesting recently, and it kind of made the news, was there were a few teams that did not send as much staff to the combine as they had in the past. Did you kind of read into it that what you would learn at the combine is something that either the team is already knows or already has? How did you kind of read that news cycle that some teams were shying away from attending the combine?
Sure. So I think a lot of the combine process comes down to, are you a good enough athlete as far as your measurables? These teams, they're sitting in the crowd and they're not necessarily seeing the results instantly. They're more just trying to watch the drills, trying to get to know these guys in the interview process. All of the drills are taped, so they're going to go back, watch their drills, essentially see their movement ability, how well they bend, how well they move their hips, and so on. So really, it comes down to the interview process would be the reason why teams have to be there in terms of using the allotted time to get to know some of these prospects as people, because really that's what the evaluation process is painting the full picture. The combine measurables itself, those are going to be shared and disseminated through all the teams, and so it's not necessarily vital for the teams to send their full contingent of staff, but it is valuable to learn and dig deeper into these players and to find those answers to the questions that you had from initial draft meetings.
All right, I'll let you go with this. Listen, I'm a huge football fan. I've been watching the games forever. I like to think that I, have some stock in my team and who I think they should pick with their selection. And you clearly have lived it in a very different way, and you have a lot of information to back up your opinions. How has your opinion of what a successful football player is changed through the use of all these analytics through the years?
Going back to what I was saying earlier, this idea of thresholds, meeting the minimums are crucial. So, again, you don't have to be the fastest player. When they showed the fastest 40 times of the last 10 years during the Combine, about 8 of those 10 names probably didn't start a game at the NFL level. So it's not necessarily about being the fastest. You don't have to be the smartest. You don't have to be the biggest. But you do have to be fast enough, you do have to be big enough, and you do have to be smart enough. And when you put it all together, all of these metrics are trying to do is really identify whether or not a player possesses those key traits or whether or not they're a risk. And over time, I think as we better understand how we can quantify all of this stuff, the model we used, the XGBoost algorithm, is fairly new. It's only been around about 4 years. And this idea of trying to model and predict can go a million different ways in terms of setting up the data, setting up the model, and such. So 2 teams that could be very deep into the analytical world can come out with 2 very different outcomes or results or conclusions. So it is still in its infancy of its application. There are certain teams that are trying to do it to an effective level. There are other teams that really aren't doing much at all as far as the draft analytics. When it comes down to it, the more information you can collect to guide not necessarily just the modeling process, but for the decision-making process, put it all together, and you've got a more refined process.
Mike Band is an analyst of the Next Gen Stats team with the NFL. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike.
Thanks, Bram.
Up next, Stacey Moore, commissioner of the American Cornhole League, taking us back to simpler times when corn teams seemed like fiction. This is the Future Sport Podcast. So let's take a minute here to thank our friends at 3 Advance. These guys are ranked one of the nation's top app developers, but that's not all. They've helped grow a bunch of sports tech startups like Team Builder, T-Box Tour, and In-Game Fantasy, but they're also experts in user experience, cloud APIs, and artificial intelligence. So if you're looking for a dev partner to bring your future sport tech to life, look these guys up. Go to 3advance.com. They're the team to make it happen, and advance you will. That's the number 3advance.com, and tell them Future Sport sent you. Our guest this week is Stacey Moore. He is the commissioner of the American Cornhole League. It is a pleasure to have you here as someone who's been to 1 million tailgates, 1 million beaches, 1 million backyard parties, and played this game for the bulk of my life. Thanks for being here, Stacey.
Thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here. It sounds like you've had a lot more tailgating and fun activities than I have.
Well, you know what, though? I think you're the lucky one. You're the one who gets to live your life playing this game, and you've made a living out of it. So I don't know how you made that happen.
I'm not quite sure yet either. So I'm still working at it. Unfortunately, I don't get to play much because I have so much work to do to grow this sport.
Let's talk about where it was, where it is, what's been happening with the league itself. You have television deals with ESPN. There has been a lot of coverage of this. This has become more than just a game that is played by sports fans or outdoor enthusiasts who are looking for something to do. So can you kind of take us through the timeline of what has happened with cornhole?
Yeah, certainly. So, similar to what you said leading off, I started playing cornhole at tailgates. I'm an NC State guy, so in the tailgate lots of Carter Finley Stadium is where I started playing, and just playing casually and recreationally. And I had a magazine called Inside Tailgating that covered the tailgating lifestyle. And as part of that, we were doing activations for sponsors with all kinds of different cornhole games. And one of the things that I saw from that was people were playing cornhole a lot more seriously than other tailgating games, and a lot more seriously than I was playing cornhole. So I watched it for a couple of years, trying to figure out why that was. Learned that there was this group of really competitive players that were traveling around and seeking some money tournaments and that sort of thing, and got to know a little bit more about the strategy of the game and what was going on. And the more I watched it, the more I enjoyed it, seeing it being played at a competitive level, and became convinced it could become a legitimate sport.
So did you model this after anything like bowling or darts or billiards, or did you see this as something that would be unique?
No, I certainly took a lot from a lot of other leagues, like you mentioned. I think bowling is a sport that we took a lot from. Tennis, I would say, is probably the primary influence, because I grew up as a competitive tennis player. So you'll see that we have like a self-rating system right now that's very similar to how people self-rate themselves in tennis, how we do different skill level divisions and that sort of thing, and how we do some of our match play events. If you're familiar with like how high school and college tennis works, we're very similar when we create a team-oriented style event to where we have singles and doubles and a team event that are associated with that. So tennis has been a big influence. Golf, something that I've looked at pretty closely as well. So I would say between bowling, tennis, and golf, that those are the three top sports that I've gotten inspiration from.
You guys have a digital network where you're profiling your athletes, the sport itself, the game itself. Where has been the success there? What have you seen that has worked for you to get more outreach into the communities?
Yeah, I think one of our magic bullets along those lines has been the clips that come out of our ESPN broadcasts. 'Cause it seems like we always get some kind of amazing shot, and because we have so many different camera angles around our linear broadcasts, we end up being able to create some really cool clips to put out in social media and on our digital network that will go viral. So that's been really cool to see. And then the coverage that we're able to create outside of our broadcast events. So we've really invested in making that viewing experience on our digital platform a lot better. We took a major step here at our last national event to do that, and it's been very well received. We saw a lot more views, a lot more stickiness to our digital broadcast on our digital network here this past January.
And with ESPN, obviously the deal gives the league a tremendous amount of exposure. As far as the broadcast goes, how did you kind of envision that working with them to put out the best version of the product?
Well, first, we had to go through the process of convincing them to give it a shot, right? And so we started out on ESPN3. We created a digital broadcast. We had kind of this vision that we wanted to be able to show this camera on top of the hole in a couple of different angles from the initial broadcast. And I think that kind of that vision was really key out of the gate, and I think we got that part of it right. And then, as we entered into our second championships is when ESPN came back and said, hey, we went back and looked at this broadcast that you did on your first championships, and we think that this might have a shot on ESPN2, and we have a slot here around your championships. Would you be interested in doing the live show on ESPN2? So we're obviously like, absolutely. What's the difference between a linear and a digital broadcast? I have no idea. So that was where we got into a pretty healthy and beneficial consultative conversation with producers at ESPN that were giving us feedback on how they thought we could improve the viewing experience of our sport and things like that. So it's just been a great relationship getting that kind of feedback from them. After we had our own vision, they've really helped us, I think, refine it here over the last couple of years and continue to make our broadcast better and better.
You know, on this show, we follow closely innovation, and I'm very curious about your athletes, how they train. Are they using any kind of technology, wearable technology? Are they into anything like biomechanics at this point? Where do you see the future of training to be a professional in cornhole?
In terms of saying how a golfer would use technology to train, or a tennis player and those other sports, like we kind of mentioned bowling even, we're not quite there yet. I think we're in the very early stages of it, where some of our players are starting to tinker around with that, and we're starting to look at things like starting to analyze launch angles and motion similar to a golf swing and things like that. So we're very early on in that process, but it's something that we're definitely interested in and aggressively expanding on and growing and bringing to our sport.
How about the boards and the bags themselves? Have they innovated over a period of time? And if so, how have they been innovated?
Yeah, so I think that's probably the biggest evolution from the game to a sport has been with the cornhole bag. And part of that was spurred by the bring your own bag policy that we created, and was original to us and unique for the sport. And that what that did was that created a lot of small businesses starting up, playing around with different fabrics and different fillings inside the cornhole bag. So we basically set the specs. We approve bags similar to, let's say, how a bowling ball would be approved, or a golf ball, something like that. And then these small manufacturers are trying to figure out how to one-up each other, how to create the next really cool bag that they think is going to give a player an advantage. So I like to say it kind of reminds me of the kind of Big Bertha golf club. When the Big Bertha came out with that driver, it was like everyone had to have one to try to compete. And so we're seeing that happen with cornhole bags. And once, Big Bertha version number 1 comes out, so there's another bag manufacturer coming out with Big Bertha number 2 here pretty quickly.
And I guess you guys now have to really closely monitor what's going on here, because you want to keep the competitions as fair as possible.
Certainly. And so, so right now what we're doing is we're approving bags on a season-by-season basis. So that way, mid-season, if there's a hot bag and players don't have access to it, then that could give players an advantage. So we want to make sure that when new bags come out, that there's enough inventory there to fill the demand for our competitive players to be able to get access to that bag if they really want it.
And as far as the boards go, has anything changed over time with what they're made out of, or any of that type of material?
Yeah, the board has been fairly steady, and so we haven't really changed the material that we use or how it planes or anything like that. We've pretty much had almost the exact same ACL Pro board, for the last 3 years or so. So that design hasn't changed a whole lot. There's been some tweaks here and there, but nothing that I would call significant.
Since we're on the boards for a moment, and since I play, and I know a lot of people that play, you should answer this question, because there's a million boards you can buy. Which one should I buy?
Right.
Which one should I buy? What's the right one to play with if you're an amateur like me?
Well, the ACL Pro board is on allcornhole.com. That's
Yeah.
the only place you can get it. So,
All right.
So that's my answer. But like you said, there's obviously a lot of boards out there and board manufacturers, and we're actually introducing a line of boards so that we can educate people on the different aspects or different types of boards, different levels, different quality. So we're launching an ACL Rec line in Walmart here this spring. That will be a cheaper board. It's not something that we will use on television on ESPN, but it's a good quality board, and it's great to put in your backyard and a great way to get started. And then we'll have an ACL competitive line, and then we have our ACL pro line.
What is the pathway to someone becoming a professional or someone who could compete in your events? How does someone go about even doing that?
So the best way is to get started with a local director, go out to a local tournament or a regional tournament. If you really want to be bold, you can just come out to a national tournament, sign up to play in one of the skill level divisions, and jump in with both feet.
But you could just do that? I could just show up? I could just show up and do that?
You can just show up as long as there's space and registration. Like our Cleveland event, we sold out all of our skill level divisions in 1.5 hours. So demand is pretty high for our nationals, but to date we have had it be open registration for our national events for everything except for the pro level. So you have to earn your way to become a pro through our point system. Our point system runs year-round. So we have our championships in August. Our point system starts back up in September. And anyone can play in the advanced division. And if you finish top 32 in the advanced division in any given season, you're going to be a pro the next year.
One more question about the board for you. I've played the standard board or something close to it for years. Is there anything out there or that you envision that would have multiple holes in the board or an ability to move the location of the single hole in some way? Is that something that is possible in the future with this?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to kind of see how that goes. There's a lot of we discuss that a lot, and there's no clear-cut, defined answer. I think how the cornhole board is going to change, or whether it's going to be the distance between the boards that changes over time. We certainly see a lot of different boards out there, kind of different takes. We see boards that have multiple holes on them. One of my favorite ones is the 5-point slot that is on top of the hole. That's one that when I initially started, I thought that was really cool. It's almost like making a 3-pointer in basketball. It's really hard to get it in that 5-point slot. That's pretty challenging, and it'd be really hard to kind of master that skill, I think. But so we'll see. For now, I think the pro players and those top players really like that consistency of that board, and like the fact that the bags are changing and they're trying some different shots and strategies evolving in a pretty cool way with how things are right now.
All right, I'll let you go with this. I'm just curious at what the marketing plan is for how you're getting the word out about the league. I saw you did a special with the two New York Giants and Jets quarterbacks, so you've had an opportunity to kind of mix in with them. I know you went to Barstool, which gives you access to a very large younger audience out there, and I'm sure they did it in their own unique way when they were working with you guys. How do you envision kind of marketing? Will it be through other sports, other outlets? Does the sport try to stand on its own? Like, what's the vision here with this?
Yeah, I think our vision out of the gate was to leverage our exposure here on ESPN primarily through PR efforts and trying to cross over with other sport and celebrity, when and where we can. I think that's one of the unique sports about cornhole. I guess that golf would have some similarities where you have a lot of different athletes that love playing golf. Right, it's very similar to cornhole. So, like you mentioned, the Sam Darnold, Daniel Jones event that we called Super Hole, that went really well. So we and Matt, we're already planning Super Hole 2 for next year, based on the success of that. So certainly, I think integrating with other sports, whether it be football, basketball, baseball, soccer, bowling, anything and everything out there, we want to be involved in.
Well, listen, this is one of my favorite interviews ever because I actually play this. So this was fun, Stacey. Thank you so much for coming on. Stacey Moore is the commissioner of the American Cornhole League. Thank you so much.
Thanks, and I appreciate you playing.
That will do it for us this week. Feel free to reach out to me directly should you have a business, a brand, or an initiative that is helping navigate this really unusual time in our history. My direct email can be found in the show notes, and I hope to hear from all of you. Be safe, and remember, the future still is now. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. The Future Sport Podcast is brought to you by 3 Advance, developers of sports tech apps that are AI-powered and UX-focused. So if you're looking to create some apps for your startup or your sports biz calls for some artificial or business intelligence, you should check out 3 Advance. They're incredible. Go to 3advance.com. That's the number 3advance.com.